Pope Francis, while speaking with journalists at a French Catholic newspaper, commented about the need for Europe to integrate the many Muslim refugees entering the continent. Among many things he talks about are how the fear of the Islamic State is not a fear of Islam itself. He draws comparisons between Islam and Christianity and acknowledges that both religions share the idea of conquest. So this is the Catholic newspaper is called Croix, and they were doing an interview with Pope Francis and specifically talking about the migrant crisis facing Europe right now and the idea of Christians and Muslims being able to live harmoniously together. So this was actually a very compelling interview. I highly recommend it. I really liked reading what he had to say. But there were a few different points that I want to hit. So for example, they are talking about how many people refer to Europe's roots as being Christian. And so he finds that, Pope Francis finds that somewhat problematic because he considers Europe to have a very multicultural identity. So he has this to say. He says, when I hear talk of the Christian roots of Europe, I sometimes dread the tone, which can seem triumphalist or even vengeful. It then takes on colonialist overtones. So he's talking about how Christianity should be of service and not colonial enterprise. And then when he's talking about migrants and refugees entering the continent, he talks about how he points to war, he points to an unfettered free market and income inequality as the reasons why there are so many refugees, as opposed to whether or not you should allow refugees in there. So then with that conversation, then he rejects the link between Muslim extremists and Islam itself and talks about how people's fear of the Islamic State, ISIS, for example, is different than the actual fear of Islam. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but just right off the bat, do you think it's a good idea for him to be making these comments?
I think it's awesome that these comments are coming from a pope of all people, but at the same time, it's kind of sad that he has to say these things. I mean, these are such obvious things that you wish everyone would share this mentality, but unfortunately, he has to say, hey guys, there's a difference between Muslims and ISIS.
Right.
That in itself is kind of sad, and he's right. Islam and Christianity do share this, peaceful rhetoric, and so do other religions. But the difference is that throughout the years, Christianity's been reformed so many times. I mean, again and again. I mean, right now in 2016, I don't see there being any problem of some Christian theocracy trying to take over, unless we're talking about like Donald Trump supporters or something. But many people in the Middle East, for example, still take the Quran more literally,
right?
Because there hasn't been that reform. We're talking about a much younger religion, so I mean that plays into it as well. But again, society and all these different things is a very rapidly changing world, and everything coming together. So it's a very, very complex topic, but I'm glad he's tackling it the right way.
And for example, he heralds the election of the first Muslim mayor in London, Sadiq Khan. He says that election kind of personifies the need of that integration and the fact that it most certainly can happen. He talks about how, for example, the terrorists in Brussels, they were Belgians, but they were the children of migrants, but they lived in a ghetto. So they're talking about how Muslims have been more ghettoized than actually integrated, and
that's
it might
be an economic problem more than a religious problem.
Precisely, and that's what I think a lot of people talk about when they're talking about the wars in the Middle East. It's like there's so many different variables, and it's not just based on the tenets of Islam. But where I felt that the most compelling thing I thought he was talking about is, in speaking to your point about the reforms that Christianity has undergone, he talks about how Christianity and Islam, they both have kind of colonialist ideas within them. For example, he says, it is true that the idea of conquest is inherent in the soul of Islam. However, it is also possible to interpret the objective in Matthew's gospel, where Jesus sends his disciples to all nations in terms of the same idea of conquest. So that's, the idea of jihad, not only holy war, but that kind of internalized, the spiritual struggle. He relates that to, for example, the Christian proselytizing mission. So, even though he very much supports the separation of church and state as well, he just thinks it's very clear that people need to be able to be free to express their religions. If people, if they want to wear a hijab, for example, if women want to wear a hijab, they can, they shouldn't be stripped of those rights. But yeah, I mean, I guess, like you said, it's great to hear somebody who is such a pillar of the Christian faith make that connection, because unfortunately many people don't, and they think that it is Islam that is causing these things to happen.
That's just the easy way out, and that's where ignorance comes into play, right? You just look at a certain group of people and you say, oh, it's that specific religion. That's the problem. You don't think about it, being a younger religion, and then certain people might take it literally, and then that opens the door to things like jihad. And it's just easier to say, that's the problem. And it's this whole, entire continent of people. That's the issue, right?
Like you said, like so many years of reform, we'd be saying the same thing if like the Inquisition was going on right now. I mean, that was some gnarly stuff going on back then, but it's like we've had years and years of Christianity becoming more and more benign and sort of innocuous. So,
and you know, people just not being exposed to certain cultures as well. I mean, you talk to, and the same thing goes for every culture, not just, you know, us versus Muslims, Muslims versus us. It spreads out to every single culture. I mean, you look at here, how divided we are, how diverse we are as a country, but at the same time, people know so little about Muslims. They probably have never met a Muslim before, yet they're the first ones in line screaming, we need to ban Muslims from this country. Well, those people have probably never met a Muslim or live anywhere near a Muslim.
Right.
And that's not a coincidence, is all I'm trying to say.
Exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I really enjoy that. Considering I am not a religious person, it's really nice to hear such progressive ideology coming from someone so central in the Christian faith. But interested what you guys think. A very compelling discussion with Pope Francis.